to run the new Alberta.
They would beg to negotiate a new deal.
The system could not be fixed.
Responsibility isn't something you outsource.
Alberta could be the new America.
Our next speaker is a Canadian journalist, lecturer, historian, and founder of the Canadian Patriot Review and Rising Tide Foundation. He's also authored the Untold History of Canada series. He's going to discuss what does global finance and potential future leaders like PM Prime Minister Mark Carney, that is, mean for Alberta's autonomy, who will truly benefit if decisions remain centralized in Ottawa. Please welcome to the stage, Matt Ehret.
Working out. Oh, hello, everybody. All right, this microphone works. Yeah, everyone can hear me okay, right? Okay, good. All right, and I've not used this clicker before, so let's go see. There we are. Thank you for coming, and I have a limited amount of time. There's a lot of big ideas that I do want to go through, so I'm going to try to be as efficient as I possibly can. I tentatively was asked, what do I want to speak about, and I'm a historian, so I like a lot of historical context on whatever I'm going to talk about. Now, the focus of what I'm going to say, as Sean pointed out, will be to bring up a few points of importance as far as what Carney represents, not just as a person, but as the representation of a certain political ideology about how the world should operate that's been inserted to impose a certain type of policy and paradigm, both onto Canada, but that's a part of a broader system. I'm the editor and founder of a magazine that I set up in 2012 called the Canadian Patriot Review. That's issue number 6, April 2013. And I, at the time, we were really mobilizing in Ottawa with an organization called the Committee for the Republic of Canada. And that I'd been working with them for about 10 years, lobbying in Ottawa, working on seminars, conferences, trying to invite MPs, senators to come and participate in a political briefing about the oncoming economic collapse that anybody looking at the right variables could understand that we were sitting on a bubble, a time bomb that was not resolved in 2006, 2007, 2008, when a giant subprime mortgage bubble or subprime bomb was detonated. But it was a reminder that we just bandaged it over. Nothing was resolved. The derivatives, the global speculative assets that far outweigh the global GDP was never resolved. The banks just became even bigger, right? The too big to fails became even bigger. And the party kept going in a different function. So we had a campaign around stopping the bail-in regime. That just got a lot louder. Yeah. Stopping the bail-in regime. And the bail-in regime, we put Mark Carney on the cover at the time with Flaherty, because that was something formulated by Mark Carney in 2010 as a program that when the banking system would go through its next systemic breakdown, instead of printing money from the outside to bail out the banks, the idea that Carney put forth with Mario Draghi, another former Goldman Sachs investment banker, put forth is that we could confiscate people's savings and transform it into bank stop to keep bankrupt banks afloat, because the banks have increasingly become, especially on Bay Street, Wall Street, the City of London, gamblers. It's become a casino. No longer have banks been serving the function that banks are designed to function, which is to provide credit for the productive economy, keep savings, provide loans, not that. The primary function, especially since the 70s, has been to gamble to make money with money, basically on unpayable rates of debt and different kinds of debt, which has resulted, like I said, in a time bomb. So we had a campaign to try to stop this. During the course of that time, I started putting together a lot of work because I was operating within Canada, and I wanted to know, what is this thing I'm interfacing with? There seems to be something frightening many of the members of parliament, that they're aware that there's a power that they cannot speak its name. There's something which is exerting pressure that I needed to understand. And so I put myself with a few of my colleagues to work trying to piece together what is the Privy Council, what are the decision-making centers that both today and through our past has shaped or misshaped Canada. And I found, again, and it manifested in some books as well, the Untold History of Canada books, which I began publishing to sort of document some of the findings, but it wasn't looking good. It wasn't looking pretty, and I became increasingly aware that the hope for Republic of Canada was not gonna be something I would see in my lifetime. And that, as Ben was mentioning, when you start looking at the deep state structures of Canada, the fact that Pierre Elliott Trudeau was part of an operation that was running terrorist agencies tied to the FLQ, running letter bombs and justifying martial law in Quebec in order to shut down an independence movement, as well as extract Christianity itself from having any influence upon policy from Quebec in 1970. That was the October crisis. That's a big deal. And the question is, did that disappear? What did Pierre Elliott Trudeau actually represent when he was inserted to bring about a technocratic overhaul of our government? What did that mean? Why did the RCMP have to change and create this CSIS in 1983, run by Pierre Elliott Trudeau's counsel, Michael Pitfield? Why did they do that when RCMP was discovered to have been behind running these different FLQ so-called terrorist cells? And did it stop after 1983? Why did CSIS destroy all of their archives from Pierre Elliott Trudeau in 1989? And we only discovered this in 2019 when historians went to actually read the Pierre Elliott Trudeau archives. Why did they say they just destroyed it 20 years earlier? What did they have to hide? And also, similarly, why did the RCMP get found guilty by a BC Superior Court in 2016 when they were found to have created a terrorist cell of Islamic terrorists who were trying to create a bomb on Canada Day in 2016, and it was discovered that the idiot couple that became radicalized and became a part of this thing were found to have been recruited, given instructions to make the bombs, deployed by every member of that cell being affiliated with the RCMP, and they were acquitted. So maybe there's some bad habits that continued on that were tied to decision-making processes that have nothing to do with the elected part of our government that we are told is our government. So Mark Carney today represents something as a continuity of policy and a method that I want people to just think about a little bit today. And I think it has a lot to do, well, there's three items I'm going to touch upon quickly in the next 14 minutes. Number one, his policy to bring Canada into the European Union, which he announced as part of the Rearm Europe War Plan. Canada, as of today, is now part of the Rearm Europe plan. That is something to create a massive 150 billion euro budget that will be part of a massive escalation to prepare for an oncoming war with seeming rivals, Russia, China, others. Also, as of June 23rd, they passed the Canada-EU Comprehensive Integration Partnership, which is like an integration on green energy, military, security, you name it, that happened. Fit for 55 Agenda 2030 also. Canada's participation in NATO and NORAD has also been increased with this. To bring King Charles into greater decision-making within Canada, that was announced with the request that Charles, develop the speech to open up the Parliament. And then to lock Canada into the Golden Dome, which is another thing that was modeled on the Israeli Iron Dome that was rebranded because it had a bit of a bad name a few months ago, called the Golden Dome, which I want to say something about too. That's part of a very, very toxic set of ideas. So military suicide, as I mentioned, June 23rd, it did happen. We are now part of this war plan to assist Europe to continue to militarize. We've been told, and there's all sorts of strange statistics being put forth to try to brainwash Canadians that half of your fellow Canadians want to join Europe. I don't think that's true. I've never met a single Canadian. I come from the East Coast. I've never met even an East Coaster that wants to do that. I don't know anybody that wants to do that. But you could see that there's an intention to try to massage people's opinions towards a certain consensus that they want us to be herded into. I mentioned quickly the Golden Dome plan. This is based upon the conception that power projection needs to be consolidated and determined by automated AI systems that Silicon Valley has been brewing that need to replace human decision-making in military affairs. With a vastly expanded military defensive shield, a long-range missile shield in the Canadian Arctic, which, by the way, Justin Trudeau had already adopted and approved in April of 2024. Mark Carney is completely on top of it, as was Pierre Poilievre. And this is something which I think is not just a danger for other nations, but also it could be used against the people living within that continent too. So it has a dual aspect to it. I think that shouldn't be ignored. And the fact that certain agencies that are tied to things like Elon Musk's operations or Palantir that are tied to the CIA should not be ignored either, and that have certain transhumanist ideologues running it who believe that there is a master class that should somehow manage the human herd. That shouldn't be ignored as sort of factors that are governing our children's lives. And yeah, I'm not joking. When I said that Canada officially has put forth an approval, we're told that Mark Carney represents everything Donald Trump is not. Well, on this point, that's not true. And Canada has officially put forth a very positive position on joining this Golden Dome. And just to get across the context of the policy that we're supporting Europe, or we're getting enmeshed in, both in Europe as well as of the USA for war with other countries. The current spectrum or layout of US military bases around the world is just laid out there, of which there are about 893 US military bases that I know of, including another 290 bioweapons laboratories spread out outside of the US border itself, mostly surrounding China, Russia. And there's a certain doctrine behind that too, which is not a great one. So do we want to be a part of that as Albertans? Economic suicide. If we're going to enmesh ourselves into the economic destiny of what's been put forth for Europe, what does that look like? Well, just to get across, I mean, the policy that we've all been sucked into since the days that Maurice Strong took control of Canada through things like the Club of Rome of Canada that Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, Michael Pitfield co-founded with many of those figures that Ben Trudeau mentioned that ran Cité Libre. Many of those figures, including Maurice Lamontagne, the former head of the Privy Council, all founded the Canadian Club of Rome in 1970. The funding for the Limits to Growth research paper from MIT that put forth the notion that the world should be managed by a managerial elite scientifically in order to reduce or keep control of population levels in conformity with certain ideas of mathematical limits to growth. That idea was funded by Canadian taxpayer money in 1971 and became infused into the World Economic Forum's operating systems in 1973. That's official. That's on their own records. So that same Maurice Strong that ran the national the Canadian oil plant policy, the national energy program of Canada under Pierre-Elliott Trudeau. That was Maurice Strong, who was the co-founder of the Club of Rome with Michael Pitfield, who headed up CSIS. That same institution did something in 1970 to force a new policy that was designed to transform our world from being industrial, productive, based on the idea that there is morality in work, that thinking about the future is what should guide the behavior of economic planning and investment, into the idea of becoming a consumer society cult that would live for the moment without thinking of the past or the future, and that would always be based upon the idea of speculating increasingly to make money with non-existent assets. And so we could see the decline on one aspect of that as we began to outsource manufacturing to cheaper nations to use slave labor from poor countries that would feed our dollaramas instead of actually producing for ourselves. That was the necessary consequence of that plan, of that paradigm. And we could see the effects even in Europe, where that consistent decline in industry and the increase of a services economy became sort of the parasite, the cancer that took over. That's something which was never meant to be a viable economy. And we could see the effects of that in Windsor, Ontario, across the Rust Belt of the USA, where once productive areas had become consciously destroyed. You know, Hitler said there was a list of different cities in the world that Hitler had on his wish list to be destroyed in the context of a war with the West. Detroit was number 2. And we did to Detroit to ourselves what Hitler wanted to do, because it was recognized that this productive power that was located in these areas in the Midwest around the Great Lakes was such a productive power that it didn't just produce things for war. It could build railroads, it could build whatever with that machine tool capacity, and that's been sabotaged by, I would say, almost design, by getting people to think that economy is whatever that guy has in his head. That's not economy. That's always been a casino. That's always been a casino. That's not actually investing in something long term. That's looking at numbers and thinking about probability theory in the moment, but not about thinking about building something for the next generation. And what you have there on the left is something Carney himself participated in. As I mentioned, the guy, even though he's ideologically committed to a green global system of management, he himself, a former investment banker at Goldman Sachs, that oversaw the growth of global derivatives and speculative financial instruments from the 1990s to the early 2000s before he became a civil servant. And that's the growth from 1998 of derivatives, fictitious instruments that are tied to like insurance on different types of security bundled, and how you could then gamble on the price of these. It's so detached from reality, it's ridiculous. But the growth of them from the destruction of Glass-Steagall, the bank separation policies of 1999, all the way to the present collapse of 2008 and to the present today, they are now over 20 times the world GDP. This is not value, and this is what we're bailing out, and this is what Carney wants us to soon bail in with the next banking crisis. Now, I mentioned as well, Mark Carney is known since his days as the governor of the Bank of Canada to his running of the Financial Stability Board for the Bank of International Settlements. He's been known as the eco-warrior of central banks. He's proud of that title. Because he's already thinking about what is the new economy going to look like that is going to be the consequence of the collapse that he helped bring on. That's part of the idea. It's not an accident that this collapse has been built into the current operating system of the transatlantic banking structure. It was designed to collapse. It's doing exactly what it was supposed to do by destroying industry, by destroying the productive economy, right? And by creating jobs that were only designed to accommodate the creation, kind of like the Pygmalion effect, of a useless class. Because they want to justify the idea that there's too many of us for the world to support. We need things like MAID. We need things to get rid of the useless eaters based on some form of cost-cutting identity. Mark Carney as well, what is this? Some of his commitments and pledges have been to lower CO2 emissions by 50% of 1990 levels by the year 2030, net zero by 2050. Same thing for Europe. He wants to make cutting CO2 targets binding and enforceable by law. He promises that somehow creating $135 trillion of investments into renewables by this new economy that he believes can be brought online. And he has said in 2009, in his 50 Shades of Green, that climate disclosures must become comprehensive, climate risk management must be transformed, and sustainable investing must go mainstream. He then said the firms that anticipate these developments will be rewarded handsomely, and those that don't will cease to exist. He helped set up the Council for Inclusive Capitalism on that basis that integrated with the Vatican in 2021. That's Lynn Forrester de Rothschild right next to the recently deceased Pope, with the idea that, again, green values that are tied to degrowth. Activities like windmills should be rewarded by banks and insurance companies, but anything that encourages society to prosper, to actually grow physically, those have to be punished out of existence. And as I mentioned here, the bail-in regime, he is an architect of that same very thing. And this represents, like I said, not just something that came out of the blue with Carney, it's been a continuous policy since at least the 60s, maybe a little bit before that. And when I looked at where did the real bursts of progress come from in my research that was manifested in the form of my book series and many videos that my wife and I have been making, it happened when provinces got their act together and were able to take their rights into their own hands, utilizing certain things that are available, like Section 92 of the BNA Act. And I'm not a fan of the BNA Act. I think it had a geopolitical fraudulent character behind it. But at the same time, when people knew how to work it, they were able to utilize those powers in order to say, okay, we're going to act like a country. And whether it was in the Social Credit Party of W.A.C. Bennett in British Columbia, who was able to literally nationalize Power Corporation, a private company, which Maurice Strong also was a part of, in order to create BC Hydro, in order to justify the creation of things like the hydroelectric dams of the Peace River and the Upper Columbia River dams that created an economic renaissance for British Columbia. That was one example. That was a huge fight. The previous slide had an image of his plans for building rail lines to Alaska through the ABCY, the Alaska, British Columbia, Yukon conferences. That was one of the ways provinces were able to organize around the dampeners, the saboteurs of Ottawa during those years. And that was his plan on the right. That didn't happen. What we have is on the left. That did happen, but that was only phase one. Phase two involved continuing rail to access all sorts of resources, of which there are still in abundance, still no rail. The rail to Dease Lake is called the rail to nowhere. They were selling it for $1 because he was ousted. It was sabotaged, and his dream to actually connect to Alaska never happened. But it still is a possibility. Whether it happens throughout, I don't know if Carney is ever going to let this happen or what, but I mean, these are good ideas that gave rise to a lot. And just to get across, the reason why Quebec was able to have those bursts of industrial progress as well, and I go through this in volume 3 and 4 of The Untold History of Canada, is because British Columbia, W.A.C. Bennett, gave a $100 million loan to Jean Lesage and the members of the l'Union Nationale Party that were able to then use that in order to invest in the James Bay project because they couldn't get any support and were being sabotaged by Ottawa the entire time. And because of that, they were able to create a situation where Quebec has a lot of energy independence, being 95% hydroelectric. There were plans to also have nuclear power, but that got sabotaged by people like Maurice Strong, who created a nuclear moratorium for Canada in 1980 as he was sabotaging Alberta energy independence. And these are some of the heroes of Quebec who died mysterious deaths, one after the other, who are all advancing this agenda. So I'll just say, for more information, there's a lot of books that I've written. There's a little book table at the Holmes family. It was nice stuff to set up and manage in the front of this facility. And I look forward to any conversations that we want to have. And by the way, I would say, I've got 30 seconds. Does this mean I believe that necessarily independence is the only way to go? Well, we might need that. And as Daniel Johnson Sr., who brought in Charles de Gaulle, said, l'indépendance est nécessaire, mais pas nécessairement l'indépendance. Independence if necessary, not necessarily independence, but if Ottawa becomes cooperative, then okay, sure, we'll stick with it. But if you're going to continue to sabotage, as I think Carney will, then independence it is, and we'll see. But that's my considerations up until now.
We sent our best people to Ottawa to fix the system, but the system could not be fixed.
They will beg to come sit at our table to negotiate a new deal.
And that is the way we're going to run the new Alberta.
Yet successive governments, blue or orange, have not done them.
About $1 billion a week on interest payments on the national debt.
It was inserted to bring about a technocratic overhaul of our government.
We're actually all on the same page for now in trying to pursue the same policies that will improve fairness for Alberta.
Responsibility isn't something you outsource.
And complete control of our own destiny here in Alberta.
They don't want to make change now, but they know that they can. Alberta could be the new America.